Hello, my name is Meerah, and I'm a Lorekeeper in one of Yogg-Sothoth libraries, and today I wanted to talk about and go over all of the book club stories that we've read this year so far, from January to August 2025. So, as you may or may not know, I started making community posts with short Eldritch horror stories that I would be reading, and so this video is just like a quick check-in or rundown vlog type thing about those books and my thoughts on them. I'll try to keep it as spoiler free as possible, though most of these were written like 50 to 100 years ago or more, so there is that. These are all short stories that are either publicly available or are in the public domain. I've also read a lot of other books this year that are not, and I'll do separate reviews on those. But for book club specifically, I wanted to be able to provide sources where people could read these kinds of stories for free. Unfortunately, that also means that most of these stories were written by white dudes from the 20th and 19th centuries. Having just one perspective on a subject, especially something as cool and neat as cosmic or eldritch horror, can be kind of stifling in my opinion, because everybody writes differently. Anyway, in January we read The Coming of the White Worm by Clark Ashton Smith, written in 1941, who is very quickly becoming one of my favorite cosmic and weird horror authors. The idea of a massive, sentient iceberg floating south and turning everything to eternal winter is really cool to me. And the story of Iva, I'm gonna pronounce it Iva, and his fellow wizards in this short story is one that I found pretty compelling and easy to invest in. Rilem Shikorth, the White Worm, is a fascinating entity and very unique in my opinion. I was still kind of recovering from traveling and the holidays and everything, so that one was the only one that I got done in January, sadly. In February, we read The Hunters from Beyond by Clark Ashton Smith and The Haunter of the Dark by H.P. Lovecraft together, so let's talk about them respectively. I have seldom been able to resist the allurement of a bookstore, particularly one that is well supplied with rare and exotic items. Is the opening line of The Hunters from Beyond, and honestly I need it on a mug, because this one was written in 1932. Maybe I'll actually design one, because that's such a mood. Bookstores are some of my favorite places, right next to libraries and gardens. The protagonist of this one is scathing to his cousin. He just straight up roasts him and his artistic abilities in the beginning, which made me really laugh. Cass once again just blew me away with this one. I was so sucked in that I honestly lost track of time. This story might be one of my favorite cosmic horror short stories, honestly. It has it all, and it's just so good. Haunter of the Dark was a quick read, but I found it very enjoyable. It was written in 1936 by H.P. Lovecraft. I genuinely felt bad for Robert. He seemed like just a curious guy, and I can relate to that. The terror he felt really comes through on the page. I was biting my nails during that last lightning storm. I really love the trend of Lovecraftian circle members writing self-inserts or characters based on their friends and then brutally killing them off in their stories. It's such a writer thing to do. Oh, you're my close friend, I'm gonna put you in a book and then I'm going to kill you. I need to remember that for the next short story I write, because for some reason that makes me really happy, and I think it's really funny as a fellow horror writer. March was an especially busy month for me. My mental health was pretty terrible. It's just been kind of a bad year for my mental health, honestly. We live in a very stressful timeline. So I've been reading a lot more to try to hang on to my sanity. In March, I read The Hounds of Tindalos by Frank Belknap Long, written in 1929. I read it twice this year, actually. Once back in January, but I am counting the reread in March, because it's more fresh on my memory. I liked it well enough. The Hounds are a fascinating and mysterious bunch. I gotta say, I wasn't a huge fan of the whole them being related to Adam and Eve thing, but also somehow not being tied to the idea of good and evil either. That sort of metaphysical conversation sort of pulled me out of the story and broke the immersion a little bit, because interjecting Christianity sort of is just a very uncosmic horror-y thing to me. I don't know how to really describe it, but I wasn't a huge fan of that. Anyway, maybe it was just the ramblings or misunderstandings of Chalmers, and subjectively he could be sane or he could be mad. So the story is very open to interpretation, I think, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. April and May were both kind of crazy, so I didn't really have a lot of time to read. I did manage to tackle one short story, though. I read The Seven Geases by Clark Ashton Smith, which was written in 1934. The Seven Geases is essentially a Lovecraftian Dante's Inferno, as the main character gets 7 curses or geases placed on him. Each takes him deeper between Mount Vormithadreth, where he meets a variety of eldritch entities and creatures that all say, "Ew, you're gross, I don't want you, pass." Cass once again paints a very vivid picture, and I honestly found this story to be pretty funny for some reason. The first one in June, The Salem Horror by Henry Kuttner, was published in 1937, follows the story of a romance author who discovers a dark secret in his basement. This story introduces Nyongtha, and honestly the main character isn't exactly a hero or even likable in my opinion, which I kinda love. Main characters that are flawed are great in my opinion. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. The other story from June is The Mask by Robert E. Chambers, published in 1895. This story is one of my favorite short stories, I think. It follows a love triangle as one of them makes a horrifying alchemical discovery that leads to tragedy. It's got drama, it's got art, it's well written, and the characters are well fleshed out. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it. In July, we read The Door to Saturn by Clark Ashton Smith and A Descent into the Maelstrom by Edgar Allan Poe. So let's talk about them. So, Clark Ashton Smith's Door to Saturn was written in 1932, and the other story is one that is said to have inspired Lovecraft by none other than Eddie Poe himself. A Descent into the Maelstrom, it was published in 1841, and it's said to include proto-cosmic terror. I'm a big Poe fan, but it's been a couple decades since I've read any of his stuff, which is like way too long, I know, so I'm excited to give it another read. The 1932 short story The Door to Saturn by Clark Ashton Smith is a story about a priest of Yonde and a worshipper of Zathaqua, as the former pursues the latter through a door to Saturn, where they meet Zathaqua's uncle, an alien race that are entirely bisexual, another alien race of bird-like people, an alien race of mushroom dwellers, a subterranean alien race, and finally an alien race that worshipped Zathaqua and his kin, where the two sorcerers eventually settled down and presumably lived the rest of their lives, as The Door to Saturn is a one-way ticket. It was an interesting story, to say the least. I enjoyed it well enough. The story reminded me a little of, like, an episode of Futurama, weirdly. For the next one, like I said, we kind of went back in time a little and read A Descent into the Maelstrom by Edgar Allan Poe. It's a story about a fisherman in Norway retelling his experience to the narrator of how he and his brothers were sucked into a huge whirlpool, but he managed to survive to tell the tale. I can definitely see why Lovecraft would have been inspired by this, as the descriptions of the ocean and the whirlpool are very vivid and otherworldly. In August, I wanted to read some of the collaborations that Lovecraft did with women, specifically Hazel Heald and Zealia Bishop, who were revision clients of Lovecraft, both published stories in Weird Tales. It's like a point of contention for a lot of people, I think. Most people don't even credit them at all because it's believed that Lovecraft revised their stories to the point that they were basically ghostwritten by him. But the fact of the matter seems to be, to me anyway, that these two women did contribute heavily to the stories, just like any of Lovecraft's male collaborators, and they did value their relationships with him, considering him not only a mentor but also a friend. Some of the letters between them and Durlist, especially the ones following Lovecraft's death, were pretty sad. Anyway, the first one is The Curse of Yig by Zealia Bishop and H.P. Lovecraft, written in 1928. Yig is one of my favorite Eldritch entities, but this story is probably my least favorite that I've read in a long time. I'll tell you why here in a minute. The other one for August is The Horror in the Museum by Hazel Heald and H.P. Lovecraft, written in October 1932. I'm going to be real honest and say that I regret reading The Curse of Yig. It was really hard for me to read. It's full of slurs. For those that may not know, I'm indigenous. I'm from the Muskogee tribe. Our reservation is in Oklahoma. I spent most of my life there. We're not Indians. Please don't call Native people Indians like Lovecraft and Bishop do in this short story. We're not from India. And redskin, which is another term they use, is like one of the worst slurs you can call us. It comes from like back when they used to pay bounty hunters essentially to turn in indigenous people's scalps, but they would just call us redskins. It's awful. Like, don't ever use that word. They also use the term squaw, which is another slur specifically for Native women. I say all these things so that you guys know not to say them, because a lot of people are just like wildly uneducated about indigenous peoples, which is really sad since, you know, all of you living in America live on indigenous land no matter where you are. So, you know, it's racist. Don't call us those things, please. I know this was written in the 1920s, but like, it's still kind of upsetting to read because people, you know, it's just not really in the forefront of people's minds. A lot of people don't even know that Native Americans still exist. Like, I've ran into those people who thought I was lying that I was Native, but like, we do still exist. Our tribes still exist. Our cultures are still around. We were not eradicated, though they did try and are still trying. If you are gonna write about Native people, I would highly suggest like doing research and reading things written by people from the tribe you're gonna write about. Native and Indigenous are the identifying words that we prefer. It's even better if you can call us by our actual tribal names and not like the white versions of our tribal names. For example, like my tribe, white people and the American government called us the Creeks for the longest time, and that's not our name. We're the Muskogee, but they just couldn't be bothered to pronounce that, I guess, so they just called us Creeks instead, which is, yeah, it's upsetting. But anyway, Lovecraft is pretty infamous for his racism, and I'm not sure why I expected better of a white woman from the early 1900s in Bishop's writing, and that's, I guess, my own fault for being hopeful. I obviously condemn both of them for their racism. So yeah, all that being said, here's my review of the rest of the story. I was pretty surprised my tribe got mentioned at all. The story is like set partially in Oklahoma though, so I guess that makes sense. Though of course they referred to us by our white name colonizers gave to us. Yeah, I just won't lie, the story kind of pissed me off. It was hard for me to read. It wasn't just like the use of slurs and incorrect terminology, like the attitude towards Native people in the writing was just really negative, and I just didn't really enjoy myself. But I still wanted to review it so y'all know that it is problematic and why it is problematic and what about it is problematic. Us natives have only recently begun to be treated as human beings, and even then I have been called those slurs before by white people when I lived on my tribe's res, like as a child too in most cases, because humans are just awful. So don't be an awful human. Yeah, surely humans can do better as a species at being kind and respectful to each other, but I don't know. Maybe that's me being just way too optimistic because current events seem to say otherwise. The story itself is about a man studying old indigenous legends about a snake deity called Yig. For all the blatant racism in the story, I do feel that they got Yig right. Many tribes have a snake deity or snakes in their pantheons and mythologies, my own included. My tribe's is a benevolent entity who controls the rain, for example. So Yig also being benevolent and less provoked, protective of its children. It makes a lot of sense to me. I like Yig as a Lovecraftian deity a lot. I don't know, maybe I'll write a story about it myself, but in like the proper and respectful way towards indigenous cultures it's supposed to be connected to, because this story was a disaster. Like, the actual plot of the story wasn't terrible. It was pretty gory, honestly, which, like, I wasn't really expecting. But if it had just been written in a way that actually treated indigenous people as humans, I think I would have enjoyed it. But that being said, I couldn't stomach it. I felt sick the entire time. Anyway, on to the other story, which is hopefully more pleasant for me to read, The Horror in the Museum. This one feels really quintessentially Eldritch horror for me, so it's everything I love about the genre. The writing is incredible and vivid and descriptive, which is always my favorite. I like to be like pulled into the environment and immersed, and this story did just that. Once again though, Heald and Lovecraft fall afoul of me when writing about or mentioning indigenous people, though thankfully this one was just the once and not throughout the entire freaking story, like in Bishop's case. what they do in this one is they use the term Eskimo to describe some indigenous peoples in Alaska. That is also a slur. I believe the appropriate term for their tribe is Inuit. So yeah, now you know. Don't use Eskimo. It's a slur. Much like how like people will say Navajo, but Navajo is also just like a really rude name that someone else gave to them, and the tribal name they prefer is Dene. So, you know, just educate yourself if you're going to write about these peoples, because like we're humans, and like we've been like genocide has been perpetrated against us for the last several hundred years, and I think it's time that we're treated like equals, like people. And it's just exhausting to read. But anyway, the rest of the story was amazing though. Super well written, as I said. So like horrible and anxious, as weird horror should be. It follows the story of Jones as he visits Roger's museum, and the main entity in this one is Rontigoth. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. It reminded me a lot of some of Chambers' work. But yeah, that's all the books we read from January to August for the Lorekeeper book club. If you too would like to partake, I make, like I said, community posts once a month here on YouTube with the story choices and the links where you can read them for free. I do only pick stories that are in the public domain, so that sort of limits my choices, unfortunately. I do read a lot of other books that aren't public domain, and you'll start to see those review videos very soon. They'll all be in the same playlist and everything. So yeah, sorry to end on kind of like a dismal vibe. I didn't realize the Curse of Yig was so awful. But now you know, and now I know. And I'm not in any way like trying to discourage you guys from reading books like that. It's just really important to be like self-aware and conscious that what you're reading is unacceptable. There's a lot of historical classics and texts that you really need to go into with a grain of salt and a lot of media literacy, and just remember that like the people that are writing them are humans with biases and prejudices, and that can often come through. I always encourage people to read historical texts. Obviously, like most of my channel is based on the work of Lovecraft, who, like I said, is like notorious for being super racist. But I think that sadly, like I said, that's just part of reading things that were written almost 100 years ago. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be read, but it's really important to acknowledge the parts of it that are offensive or racist or sexist or whatever, so that you can be educated moving forward if you choose to write about the same kind of people, so you can write in a more respectful and kind way to different cultures. I didn't mean for this to turn into a TED Talk. That book just really upset me and pissed me off a lot. For September's reads, I do already have 2 picked out. I haven't read them yet though. Horror from the Hills by Frank Belknap Long and The Gorgon by Clark Ashton Smith. So I will be posting another book club video probably in January, going over what was read during the fall and the winter. And yeah, I hope you guys will be around for that one. That's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and a super special thank you as always to my channel members, especially Loremaster PwNaGeDOTexe. And yeah, may y'all grant you all the knowledge you seek. I hope to see y'all next time here in the library.